Hello there. Tonight, we're peeling back every layer of time. No, not back to kings, queens, or crumbling empires. We're going much, much further. Past the pyramids, past the wheel, past even the first time someone got blamed for eating the last berry in the clan's stash. We're going back to when humanity wasn't history, it was survival. So settle in, light a fire, pour some herbal tea, or if you're going full caveman mode, chew on a root. And let's step into the shadowy edges of the prehistoric world to ask a question that seems simple, but isn't. What did cavemen actually do all day? If you enjoyed tonight's journey, I'd love it if you gave it a like, subscribed, or left a comment on where you're listening from. Now, before we start imagining Fred Flintstone punching a time card or a grunting Neanderthal checking emails made of bark, let's get something straight. Cavemen is a term that comes with a lot of baggage. We've turned it into a cartoon, a punchline, an outdated mascot for everything primitive. But real cavemen, they were us. Well, almost. Let's set the stage. It's somewhere between 40,000 and 200,000 years ago. The Ice Age is in full swing. The continents are chilly, raw, and mostly untouched by human footprints. Our ancestors, Homo sapiens, Homo neanderthalensis, and a few other experimental cousins, are wandering, surviving, adapting. And yes, sometimes living in caves. But don't be fooled. The cave was just the Airbnb, not the whole story. Caves were shelter, temporary housing, a good place to avoid snowstorms, lions, and whatever weird predators evolution was cooking up that week. But most of the day, it was spent outside. So what did they do? They woke up with the sun. No alarms, no snooze buttons. Just the bitter cold of morning or, if they were lucky, the soft grumble of a nearby fire and the distant snort of a sleeping companion. Maybe a kid, maybe a cousin, maybe the guy who snores like a dire wolf, and nobody's had the heart to exile them yet. The day began with hunger, always hunger. You didn't count calories back then, you chased them. So the clan splits up. Some go looking for edible plants, roots, berries, nuts, maybe a suspicious mushroom that only the really brave, or really unlucky, test. Others? They grab spears. Now don't picture a line of organized warriors charging into a field. Hunting was hard, slow, often unsuccessful, sometimes deadly, but always necessary. They tracked. They followed footprints, bent branches and steaming warm dung. The smell of sweat, blood, the glance of movement. They learned the language of animals, not in words, but in rhythm. The pause of a deer, the gallop of a boar, the scatter of birds meant something big was coming or leaving. It could take hours, days. Sometimes the prey got away, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the prey was bigger, stronger, and faster, and the hunters didn't come back at all. But sometimes the hunt worked. It was a celebration, not with banners or confetti, but with blood, fire, and a full belly. The kill would be butchered quickly. Everyone helped, even the kids. Nothing was wasted. Meat for food, bones for tools, tendons for string, hide for warmth. And yes, this was work. Real, grueling, everyday work. Just like agriculture, just like office jobs. Except instead of replying to 100 emails, you were trying not to die of starvation while chasing something that could gore you to death. Back at the camp, or the cave, or the rock overhang, or the fire ring, the others had been busy too. The gatherers, mostly women and children, returned with their harvest. Edible roots, wild onions, leaves with medicinal properties, maybe a stray egg from a distracted bird's nest. They knew the forest like we know street signs. Not just where things were, but when. The seasons told them what to look for. And while all this was happening, someone was making things, tools, weapons, clothes, baskets, fire. Yes, fire had to be made, nurtured, protected. This wasn't a world where you could flick a lighter. Fire was life, and it took skill to coax a spark from stone and tinder. Maybe someone sat by the fire and carved a bit of wood into a figurine. Maybe someone else smeared ochre on a stone wall. Not because they were bored, but because even in the midst of survival, humans made art. Maybe not for beauty, maybe for magic, for luck, for the memory of something seen in the wild. And while the adults worked, the kids learned. Not in a school, in the field. Observation was their curriculum. Mimicry, their exam. Want to know how to weave a mat? Watch your mother's hands. Want to hunt like your uncle? Follow silently. Want to know how not to die from a mushroom? Hope someone tells you before you eat the wrong one. By late afternoon, the day's haul was shared. Meals weren't eaten in silence. They were social. Grunts, laughing, stories, fights. The tale of the deer that got away. The bruises from a fall. The misadventure of the young boy who poked a sleeping lizard and regretted it. Evenings were for repair, for rest, for planning tomorrow, for huddling close under fur and smoke from the fire, praying the wolves stayed far away and the weather stayed kind. And before sleep took them, maybe, just maybe, someone sang. Not a lullaby, but a rhythm, a chant, something old even then. And then the fire dimmed, the wind outside howled, and sleep came. The next day, they'd do it all again. But here's the twist. It wasn't all survival. It wasn't just a brutal slog from birth to death. These people, these so-called cavemen, they laughed, they loved, they played. There's evidence of musical instruments made from bone flutes, of shells carved into jewelry, of graves filled with flowers and trinkets and care. They believed in something more, in each other, maybe in spirits, maybe in gods, maybe just in the whisper of wind that rustled the trees and reminded them, you are not alone. We've only just begun. There's more to uncover. What they believed, how they loved, how they fought, how they died, the evolution of language, the mystery of cave paintings, the subtle dance of society forming in the ashes of the wild. We left our ancestors under a night sky, huddled near flickering firelight, tucked into the curve of a cave or the warmth of a communal shelter. The hunt was done, the fire still crackled, and the stories, half memory, half myth, danced on soot-darkened walls. But what comes next? What lies beyond just survival? Let's talk about the thing that sets humans apart. Not the fire, not the tools, not even the meat sharing. Let's talk about imagination. Because somewhere between the snare traps and sharpened flint, cavemen started doing something strange. They began painting the walls, not to decorate, not to pass the time, but to remember, to communicate, maybe even to worship. If you've never seen the cave paintings of Lascaux or Chauvet in France, or the even older ones in Indonesia, you might not understand how shocking they are. These aren't doodles. They aren't crude. They're hauntingly beautiful. Graceful deer, towering bison, horses with wide, expressive eyes, some drawn with shading perspective. They look like the work of someone who's not just observing, but feeling. And here's the kicker. These weren't done in the front of the cave, where the light reached. They were done deep inside, far from warmth, far from daylight. Places you'd need a torch to enter. Places echoing with silence. So the question isn't how they painted, but why. No one knows for sure. Maybe it was magic. Maybe it was memory. Maybe they believed painting the hunt would give them power over it, or that the spirit of the beast lingered in the mark. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a gift, a message to others, or even to the dead. Which brings us to another human mystery, death. Cavemen didn't just die and rot. They buried, carefully, sometimes with tools, sometimes with beads, sometimes curled up, fetal-like, as if returning to a cosmic womb. This tells us two things. 1, they grieved. 2, they believed something came after death. Now, beliefs don't fossilize, but bones do. And the way those bones were laid to rest tells us that even in the cold grip of Ice Age life, people cared. They mourned. They marked loss with ceremony. And ceremony, that's society. Let's not imagine cavemen as loners, each hunched in their corner. No, these were groups, clans, tribes. They had structure, maybe not formal governments, but definitely hierarchies. The strongest hunters didn't just get bragging rights. They got food first, maybe mates, maybe influence. But it wasn't brute force alone. The elders held knowledge. The gatherers controlled daily nutrition. The shamans, the ones who interpreted dreams or tracked the stars, held a different kind of power. Mystical, revered. Because yes, they looked up, not just at predators or storm clouds, but at stars, stone circles, lunar markings scratched into bone. These weren't mistakes. Early humans were trying to make sense of time, seasons, cycles, maybe even destiny. Now imagine this. It's a full moon. The hunt has been successful. The fire is roaring. There's laughter, dance, music maybe, from a reed whistle or a hollowed-out bone. Children copying their parents' movements. Elders sharing stories that sound suspiciously like origin myths. Suddenly, this isn't survival. It's culture. And that brings us to language. No recordings, obviously. No ancient podcast where Ugg interviews Gronk about mammoth migration. But we know language existed, had to. Complex coordination like group hunting, tool sharing, fire maintenance, social structure. It doesn't happen in silence. But here's the poetic twist. The first human words, we'll never know them. They're lost. They came before writing, before script. They were sound and gesture and breath and meaning. Think of that. Somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, someone made a sound, and someone else understood it. A shared thought, a warning, a joke. And in that moment, humanity cracked open. From then on, days weren't just survival loops. They became tapestries of interaction. Let's go back to our tribe. Morning again. The air's misty. The fire is low, smouldering. One man sharpens a blade. A woman crushes seeds into a kind of paste. A child stacks stones into patterns. Not useful, but not meaningless either. Young animals play to learn, to test boundaries, to explore what it means to be alive. And our ancestors, they played. They threw things. They raced. They mimicked. They teased. And from that came stories. And from stories came myths. And from myths came meaning. Even conflict had rules. You didn't just smash your neighbor over the head with a rock. Well, not unless things went really bad. Disputes were probably handled through posturing, shunning, maybe exile. Because the worst punishment wasn't death. It was being cast out, alone. In a world where wolves waited in the dark, being alone was a death sentence, which meant cooperation mattered, empathy mattered. There are Neanderthal skeletons showing signs of healed injuries that would have required weeks of care. Someone fed them, protected them, cleaned their wounds. Compassion is ancient, but so is violence. Let's not get dreamy-eyed. There were conflicts, territorial disputes, skirmishes, ambushes. Some skulls bear the marks of trauma, blunt force, arrowheads embedded in bone. But this wasn't non-stop warfare. That's a myth. Most of the time, violence wasn't the rule. It was the breakdown of the rule. Most of the time, life was quiet, repetitive, beautiful even. Hunt, gather, teach, mend, feed, sing, sleep, repeat. And through that repetition, humanity slowly evolved. The days were long, the work was hard, but they weren't empty days. They were filled with the foundations of everything we now call human. And they did it all without knowing what they were building. Next, we'll step into the finer details. How did relationships work? What was childhood like? Did they fall in love, cheat, forgive? Spoiler, yes. So now we know they hunted, they gathered, they carved, they painted. They buried their dead and sang under stars. But beyond survival, beyond stone and fire, there's another story flickering quietly in the corners of prehistory. It's about relationships. Not the mythic kind with hair-pulling and club-wielding. The real kind. The messy, emotional, frustrating, and profoundly human kind. Let's talk about love. Was there such a thing as falling in love 100,000 years ago? Probably not with candlelit dinners or slow dances under moonlight. But yes, there was affection, attachment, preference. Our ancestors, just like us, were wired to bond, to seek connection. Biochemistry doesn't care about centuries. Oxytocin doesn't need a dating app. Coupling was practical, but it wasn't cold. Fossil records show signs of long-term pair bonds, individuals buried near each other, with similar wear patterns on teeth and bones, suggesting shared lives. We even see signs of male individuals caring for young that may not have been theirs, suggesting early adoption, step-parenting, or at the very least, social responsibility. Let's not pretend prehistoric life was a soap opera, but we'd be naive to think jealousy didn't exist, or heartbreak, or betrayal. These are emotional reactions hardwired into our species. And if someone wandered too close to another person's mate, well, let's just say that rock tools weren't only used on mammoths. But for all the pain, there was also partnership. A couple might spend years together, hunting, gathering, raising children. They weren't playing house. They were building something, together. Because in a world that could kill you by accident, one wrong plant, one sprained ankle, you needed someone to watch your back, to share the load. And what about children? Ah, yes, the smallest humans in the most dangerous world imaginable. What could go wrong? Cavemen didn't raise their young in nuclear families. They had tribes, villages. It took more than 2 people to keep a child alive when food was scarce and predators prowled. Babies were likely passed around, fed by multiple adults, soothed by anyone with free arms and a heartbeat. This is called cooperative breeding, a system still seen in some hunter-gatherer societies today. It means children grow up not just with parents, but with a web of caregivers, aunts, uncles, grandparents, unrelated allies. If one adult was hurt or lost, others filled the gap. Childhood was shorter, of course. At least, the version we understand today. A 7-year-old in Paleolithic times wasn't in school. They were out learning to track animals, or gathering kindling, or being warned not to fall in the fire. But there was still joy, play, exploration. Kids made toys, clay animals, carved sticks, bones turned into rattles. They raced, they mimicked, they wrestled, they laughed. And if they survived into adolescence, a feat by no means guaranteed, they started learning roles. not forced, not rigid, but shaped by the needs of the group. Girls gathered, but also hunted in some places. Boys learned to track, but might also memorize which plants could poison or heal. There were no schools. The forest was the teacher, the clan, the curriculum, and always, ever present, there was work. Let's be clear, there were no weekends. As far as we know, there were no named days at all, no paid time off. Every day was both a necessity and a gamble. If someone slacked, the whole group suffered. If the hunt failed, nobody ate. But this didn't mean every waking moment was misery. Work likely had a rhythm, repetition, a kind of meditative quality. Gathering nuts probably wasn't just labor. It could have been conversation, a walk through familiar woods, stories told in low voices, laughter shared over strange bugs and old jokes. And on the topic of stories, imagine the first one. Imagine the first time someone strung together a tale of a hunt that went wrong, of a spirit seen in the flames, of a hero who outran a saber-tooth. Was it fiction? Was it memory? Does it matter? What matters is that someone listened, then remembered, then retold. This is how culture began, not with writing, but with repetition. Oral tradition, passed hand to hand, voice to ear, generation to generation. And through it, beliefs began to take shape. Not organized religion, not yet, but patterns of thought, animism. The belief that everything, rocks, rivers, trees, animals, had spirit, agency, a will of its own. This wasn't superstition. It was logic wrapped in mystery. If the wind howled through the valley and then your cousin died, was it coincidence or warning? Maybe the animal you hunted was offended. Maybe the tree you cut bled because it wanted to live. Maybe, in that dream you had where your grandfather spoke to you, something real was happening. This worldview wasn't irrational. It was connected. It tied humans to the landscape, to the creatures they shared it with, and to each other. And it shaped how they behaved. You didn't take more than you needed. You didn't kill wastefully. You didn't forget to thank the creature whose life you took. Because maybe it would remember. Maybe it would come back. These weren't commandments carved in stone. They were lived truths, tested every day in frostbitten valleys and shadowy woods. But even as beliefs bloomed, the world pressed in. Climate changed. Herds migrated. Ice crept southward. Rivers dried or flooded. Groups had to move, had to adapt, had to innovate, or they would vanish. And so, every few years, maybe every generation, the clan would pack up, not with suitcases and passports, with wrapped hides, stone tools, children tucked under arms, fire carried in embers wrapped in moss. And they'd go toward better land, toward rumors of reindeer herds, toward survival. And what did they leave behind? Sometimes nothing but footprints. Other times, a cave wall, a handprint in ochre, a fire pit, a bead, kagilobol keshul. Next, we're going to dig deeper, literally and figuratively, into the rise of innovation. How tools changed everything, how craftsmanship became identity, and why the invention of the needle may have mattered more than the invention of the wheel. We've seen their fires. We've heard their songs in the dark. But now it's time to talk about what's left behind. Not stories, not bones, not even art, tools. Because if fire was humanity's first miracle, then tools were its first philosophy. Picture a single flake of stone, chipped off with precision from a larger rock, sharp enough to slice through hide, shape wood, or carve meat from bone. It's not much to look at. Just a bit of rock, broken on purpose. But it's everything. That flake is language. It's thought made physical. It's the difference between gnawing and cooking, between hoping and building. Early humans didn't just break rocks, they designed them. Obsessed over the angle of impact, the curve of the edge, they passed that knowledge on, slowly, patiently. The flint knapper was part artist, part engineer, part teacher. This wasn't a throwaway act. This was tradition, identity. The Acheulean hand axe, for example, is so perfectly symmetrical that some anthropologists argue it wasn't just a tool, it was a display, a flex, the caveman equivalent of driving a luxury car carved from obsidian. And then came refinement, scrapers for hides, awls for piercing, burins for engraving. Eventually, bone needles. Yes, the humble sewing needle, one of the most underappreciated inventions in human history. Think about it. You're facing glacial wind, sleet, snow. You've got fire, but fire doesn't travel. Fur keeps you warm, but only if it wraps and fits. Enter the needle. With a fine piece of bone and animal sinew, suddenly you can stitch. Tailor. Make clothing not just warm, but wearable on the move. It changed everything, because once people could wear the environment, they could go anywhere. North, south, over mountain passes, across tundra, from Africa to Europe, from Asia to the Americas. The Ice Age didn't stop them. The deserts didn't stop them, because they carried with them not just tools, but knowledge. And knowledge was the one thing that didn't get left behind. But knowledge is heavy, not literally, but in the way it must be taught, relearned, practiced. And that's where time becomes important. You see, people often imagine prehistoric life as one unbroken sprint for survival, a constant panic of cold and hunger. But here's the truth. They had time. More time than we might guess. An average hunter-gatherer in a resource-rich area, say a fertile valley in late summer, might spend only 3 or 4 hours a day actively working to secure food. The rest? Repairing gear, sharing news, making ornaments, sitting around the fire, watching the sky, playing, flirting, carving. This was when culture bloomed, when someone, maybe bored of sharpening spear points, decided to shape one like a fish. When a shell wasn't just worn, it was painted. When a tooth became a pendant. When someone picked up a piece of red ochre and thought, this could be more than dirt. This is where identity emerged. You weren't just a human. You were that human. The one with the antler comb. The one with the carved wolf tooth. The one who made beads from bird bones and wore them. Not because they were useful, but because they were beautiful. And that, right there, is the leap. The moment survival stops being enough and meaning starts to matter. It didn't happen all at once. There were no fashion weeks in 30,000 BCE. But slowly, region by region, style appeared. Different tribes left behind different toolkits, not just different by material, but by flair, technique, flavor. Suddenly you could tell, these scrapers are from the west, these beads from the north, that spear, definitely made by someone from the highlands. It was the beginning of trade, not in the modern sense, but in the idea that something made by another group could be worth carrying, even across vast distances. Shells from coasts were found deep inland. Obsidian from volcanic regions turned up thousands of kilometers away. Someone had to carry that. Why? Because it mattered. Not for food, not for fire, but for connection, for status, for relationships between groups. Trade meant contact. Contact meant culture. Culture meant stories, beliefs, ideas traveling faster than feet. And with all of this, mobility, knowledge, art, ornamentation, came a subtle, powerful shift. Craft, specialization. Not in the rigid way of modern economies, but in the sense that certain people got really good at certain things. The best flint knapper, the one who could tan hides without tears, the one whose bone needles never snapped, the elder who knew which root cured infection, the girl who sang to the fire and everyone swore it burned brighter when she did. These people weren't just skilled, they were remembered. And remembering, that's the foundation of legacy. Now let's talk about ritual, because craft isn't far from magic. And magic, in the Paleolithic mind, wasn't illusion. It was cause and effect you couldn't see, but believed in anyway. Maybe you shaped a figurine of a pregnant woman and kept it near the fire. Maybe you carved notches into wood each time the moon changed. Maybe you arranged stones in circles or painted hands on cave walls with fingers splayed. Why? To ask, to thank, to mark your place in a world that offered no guarantees. Because here's the hard truth. For all the beauty, life was fragile. Child mortality was high. Injuries that are minor today, an infected tooth, a broken ankle, could kill. You could vanish into snow, be taken by flood, go to sleep one night and never wake up. And so they marked life with more than time. They marked it with meaning. That's why figurines matter. That's why handprints on cave walls endure. Those weren't just decorations, they were declarations. I was here, I lived, I shaped the world with my hands. So far, we've seen our ancestors build, wander, sow, sing, trade, carve, and bury. They've invented tools, planted seeds of culture, and whispered stories into the firelight that we're still trying to hear thousands of years later. But what happens when clans meet? Not in the same household, not in shared valleys, but face to face. Two bands of people who don't speak the same dialect, who don't know each other's names, who don't know if the other is bringing gifts or war. Let's talk about early human interaction, about territory, tension, and the earliest fragile threads of diplomacy. First, understand this. Space mattered. Every group had its range. Rivers they followed, hunting grounds they returned to, seasonal routes between foraging zones. These weren't mapped, but they were known, etched into memory, passed from elders to children like unwritten property lines. So when strangers appeared, figures on a hilltop, unknown faces at the edge of the trees, hearts raced, spears gripped tighter, firelight burned a little hotter. And yet, not every encounter ended in violence. In fact, a surprising number probably didn't. We imagine prehistory as brutal, a time of constant war, clans smashing into each other like rival tribes in a video game. But that's a modern projection. In truth, violence was risky, dangerous, inefficient. Killing your neighbor might earn you territory, but it also cost you time, energy, and possibly lives you couldn't afford to lose. Because remember, every person was valuable. A skilled hunter, a healer, a firekeeper, a weaver of baskets. Death wasn't just personal, it was an economic loss. So many early encounters likely began with caution, yes, but also with curiosity. The first signs were probably nonverbal. Open hands, no raised weapons, a slow approach. Then offerings, something visible, tangible. Shells, food, a carved object. Something that said, "We come in peace unless you don't." Sometimes this worked, sometimes it didn't. But when it worked, the results were astonishing. Groups exchanged stories, shared techniques, swapped mates. Yes, mating between bands was common and likely necessary to avoid inbreeding. Sometimes groups merged entirely. Other times, they left with only knowledge, a better way to make fire, a new food they hadn't tried, a warning of snowstorms or predators. In these interactions, we see the roots of civilization, cooperation beyond kin. But of course, not every encounter was peaceful. There were fights, ambushes, raids. A band might encroach too far into another's range. An old grievance might resurface. Someone might be blamed for a drought, an illness, a failed hunt. But violence wasn't random. It had rules, taboos, even rituals. Evidence suggests some Paleolithic conflicts were more like choreographed duels than full-on massacres. A fight between champions, a warning strike, a symbolic theft, enough to settle honor without devastating the population. Because again, losing people was too costly. And here's where things get strange. The deeper we look, the more we see that early humans were experimenting, not just with stone and fire, but with society. We find sites where large groups gathered, seasonally perhaps, to share feasts. Animal bones piled in huge mounds, stone tools from dozens of different regions, signs that hundreds of people came together for something more than hunting. A festival maybe, a meeting of tribes, a moment of unity, because even back then, humans were drawn to connection. They needed allies, mates, new stories, news of the world, but they also needed ritual. Think about it. You're a small group, 20 to 40 people, moving through a vast and dangerous world. You have no clocks, no calendars, no written records. How do you remember time? You don't just measure it in moons or winters. You measure it in moments, those shared communal events that tie you to others, that remind you that you're not just a small band in the woods. You're part of something wider, something ancient. These events likely had music, dance, food, offerings to the spirits, the ancestors, the land itself. Maybe it was a time to mourn the dead, to name the newborns, to settle disputes, to find new partners, to celebrate surviving one more year. So yes, cavemen celebrated. And maybe those celebrations were the birthplace of politics, not in the form of voting or governance, but in negotiation, in consensus, in choosing which path to take, whose advice to follow, how to allocate the food, when to leave and when to stay. Even the act of following a leader, temporary or not, was political. It required trust, reputation. Some leaders may have emerged because they were strong, others because they were wise, others still because they were generous, good at redistributing the kill, remembering who needed what. Because fairness mattered. In groups that small, resentment is poison. If one person hoarded meat while another starved, people noticed. If one voice dominated while others were silenced, tension brewed. So early humans learned to share, to balance, to negotiate. This wasn't idealism, it was survival. And it worked. Because here's the shocking thing. Hunter-gatherer societies were some of the most egalitarian in human history. Women had voices, children were included, elders were respected, not hidden away. Labor was divided, but not hierarchically. There was no king, no permanent chief, just people relying on each other. It wasn't utopia, but it was more balanced than many civilizations that came after, until something changed, slowly, gradually. In response to pressures we're still trying to understand. That's what we'll explore next. The tipping point, the moment humanity began to settle, to build, to plant. And in doing so, unknowingly said goodbye to the lifestyle that had carried them across ice, fire, and millennia. For tens of thousands of years, humanity wandered. Not aimlessly, but purposefully. with a rhythm carved by necessity and instinct. Our ancestors followed rivers, stars, seasons. They were adaptable, intimate with the land, bonded to each other by shared danger and survival. But then something changed. Not overnight, not in a single place. They stopped moving. They began to stay. It starts subtly. Maybe someone noticed a seed sprout where a fruit had dropped. Maybe a child left a chewed root behind, only to return moons later and find a familiar plant in its place. Maybe the clan, weary of migration, discovered a place so rich with resources they didn't have to leave. And so, little by little, they lingered. What began as extended camps became seasonal settlements. What was once temporary started to take root, literally. This moment, this quiet pivot from roaming to staying, was the beginning of the end of the caveman. But during that slow transition, life didn't change all at once. For many generations, people still lived in what we'd call a Paleolithic way, hunting, gathering, watching the sky for signs. The difference was, now they returned to the same spots, year after year. They began to know a place, not just pass through it. And when you know a place, you start to alter it. You build, not just temporary shelters, but more permanent ones. You pile stones, dig post holes, bone, hide, mud, thatch. You make something meant to last. And that, more than anything, reshape daily life. Because permanence changes how you think. Suddenly, you're not just worrying about what you'll eat today, but what will grow tomorrow. What happens if the rains don't come? What happens if the animals move and you don't? So you plan, you store, you hedge your bets. Food that once vanished in a single night around the fire, now some of it is dried, buried, kept, maybe in pits, maybe in baskets sealed with resin, maybe hidden from the neighbors. And with storage comes risk, because stored food, well, that can be stolen. So now someone has to guard it. Now the camp needs a watch. Now, can you believe it? We've just invented worry. Cavemen, our earliest ancestors, weren't foolish. They knew the trade-offs. Staying in one place meant stability, yes, but also responsibility, complexity, new dangers. But it also offered something almost divine, surplus. You weren't just surviving from one meal to the next. You could breathe, you could invent, you could spend hours shaping a better tool, crafting a tighter basket, teaching your child to make fire faster. You could specialize more deeply. Suddenly, someone isn't just good at making spears. They're the spear maker. Someone else is the fisher, the forager, the storyteller, the one who always finds honey, the one who never gets lost, the healer who knows which bark stops pain. These roles deepen, root, strengthen, and with them, the pace of the day begins to shift. The morning still begins with hunger, but now you don't have to chase it. You might tend to traps set the night before. Check the clay pot where roots were soaking. Watch the nearby patch of grain that's begun, barely, to yield tiny heads of seed. You spend more time maintaining than chasing. It seems small, but it's massive. Because now, some days, you don't leave camp at all. You wake, stretch, mend clothing, crack lice from seams, feed the fire, maybe make a new tool, carve a toy, dry herbs, reshape a broken awl. Maybe you talk for hours, not in short bursts between chores or overshared meat, but long, spiraling stories, debates, dreams. Someone wonders what's beyond the hills. Someone else remembers a storm from years ago. Someone sings and someone else harmonizes. This is the dawn of language as art, not just utility. And while the adults talk, the children grow. Now with more time, more safety, more attention. So they begin to ask, why do we eat that root, but not the other one? Why do the animals move in spring? Why does the moon vanish sometimes? You don't always know, but you answer anyway. And so myth is born. A story becomes the container for truth, not the truth of science, but the truth of meaning. Why does the river flood? Because the water god is angry. Why do we plant here and not there? Because our ancestors walked here once and it's sacred. These stories, part memory, part metaphor, become anchors. They tie people not just to place, but to each other. And in this net of stories, ritual tightens. You don't just gather berries, you thank the spirit of the tree. You don't just bury the dead, you send them with tokens so they're remembered in the place they go next. And now, some people aren't just toolmakers or hunters, they're keepers of songs, stories, mysteries. The ones who remember, who bless, who see the invisible threads between all things. These proto-priests, shamans, seers, mystics may have been feared or revered or both. And with that reverence comes something new, status. It's subtle at first, a slightly better sleeping space, first pick of meat, an extra bead or two. But over time, status solidifies. Some people have more food, more shelter, more say. Others have less. You can see where this is going, the seeds of inequality. But let's not leap ahead just yet. In these early moments of semi-settlement, people are still mostly equal, mostly cooperative, mostly surviving side by side. Still, the cracks have started, because with surplus comes difference, and difference, if left unchecked, becomes hierarchy. But here's the irony. That hierarchy, that inequality, that structure, it grew out of the same impulse that brought humans everything else. The desire to stay warm, stay safe, stay together, to stop moving, to claim a little piece of earth, however small, and say, this is ours. So here we are, standing in the twilight of the Paleolithic world. Our ancestors are still recognizable, still clad in hide and soot, still cautious around fire and strangers. But something in the rhythm of their lives has changed. The camp doesn't move so often. The children know the trees by name. The animals in the hills aren't just game anymore. They're part of a calendar. This is no longer just caveman life. This is something else. A new chapter. And it starts with a seed, literally. One day, someone drops a seed, maybe millet, barley, wheat, near the edge of camp. Maybe they notice it grows. Maybe it's accidental. Or maybe, just maybe, someone already understands the rhythm, the logic, the cause and effect of it. And from this small insight comes one of the most colossal revolutions in human history: agriculture. Farming didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It crept in. First as assisted foraging, watering wild grains, clearing competing shrubs. Then as cultivation, saving the biggest seeds, planting them in better soil. Over time, fields replaced forests, and the people changed with them, because farming demanded a new kind of day. Gone were the roaming hunts, the high-stakes chases across ridges. In their place, routine, predictability, monotony even. Now you woke up not to track herds, but to weed a patch of earth, to carry water, to crush pests, to chase away birds, to plant, wait, hope. This was a different kind of gamble. Instead of risking your life for today's meal, you gambled seasons for next season's bounty. And when the crops came in, feast. And when they failed, famine. Farming gave security, but it also chained people to place, to work, to labor that never quite ended. Because once you have crops, you need storage. Walls, fences, bins, pots. Rats become enemies. So do your neighbors. Suddenly, the day isn't about watching the stars. It's about counting sacks, guarding them, planning who eats what, and when, and how much. You need rules. You need leaders. You need structure. So little by little, those loose-knit bands, once equal, once mobile, become anchored hierarchies, chiefs, elders, owners, even, of land. And the days of the average person become filled with a new kind of task: toil, grinding grain, fetching water, mending fences, tending flocks, hours upon hours of repetitive, back-breaking work. It's a strange paradox. Cavemen, once seen as primitive, may have had more leisure than the first farmers. But don't mourn just yet. There was still life between the rows. Families grew. Babies had better odds of survival with steady food. Communities stabilized. With more people staying in one place, the creative brain had room to stretch. Ceramics emerged, not just for cooking, but for art. We see decorative pots, ritual vessels, painted motifs. People weren't just surviving, they were expressing. Weaving became an art form, not just a necessity. Patterns emerged, styles, signatures, identities woven into fabric and passed between generations. And then, buildings, not caves, not temporary huts, real structures, mud brick homes, storage pits, courtyards. In one of the earliest proto-cities in modern Turkey, people built homes stacked like honeycomb, walking across rooftops like alleys. Walls were painted, shrines were carved, skulls were displayed with care. This wasn't a camp anymore. It was architecture. And in the center of these settlements, ritual, no longer just personal or family-based. Now it belonged to everyone. Temples rose, simple at first, rings of stone, raised platforms, sacred enclosures, offerings of bone and grain, strange figurines with wide eyes and swelling bellies. We weren't just living near the gods now. We were trying to house them. And with temples came priests, specialists in the unseen, the calendar keepers, the dream interpreters, the ones who said, "Plant now," who warned of storms, who claimed to speak with spirits. And sometimes they were right, so people listened. And power, once shared among the many, pooled into the hands of a few. Now, some woke at dawn to pray, others to plough, still others to rule. Division had arrived, and along with it, something else entirely foreign to the old clans: property. Land was no longer just a shared backdrop. It became a boundary. This is my field. These are our sheep. That path, it belongs to them, not us. Conflict followed. Now your enemy wasn't just hunger or cold. It was your neighbor who let their goats stray too far, or the rival village whose irrigation canal diverts your stream. Disputes grew. So did defenses, walls, watchtowers. Spears made not for hunting, but for war. And with war, heroes, stories, sagas, lineages. The person who won the fight didn't just save the village. He became chief, then king, then myth. But even in these rising shadows, daily life remained deeply human. People still woke beside the fire, still chewed on roots and gossip, still repaired their tools, still kissed their children goodnight, if they had enough light to see their faces by, still hoped the rains would come, still feared the dark, still looked at the stars and wondered, what else is out there? Because even with walls and gods and fields and names etched in stone, the core of the human day didn't vanish. It just changed form. What the cavemen did all day, the earliest ones, is still with us, just dressed in different clothes. Tomorrow's office is yesterday's cave. Tomorrow's lunch break is yesterday's shared kill. Tomorrow's prayer is yesterday's whispered plea to the wind. But the story isn't over yet. Next, we look at the final echoes of the true cavemen, the last nomads, the survivors who never settled, the ones who carried fire across continents while the rest of the world stood still. By now, most of the world was beginning to shift. The great human experiment, this long walk through ice and thunder, through cave and forest, was giving way to something different. Stone circles became shrines. Villages grew roots. Fields spread like fire across the landscape. But not everyone followed that path. Some refused, or couldn't, or simply didn't see the appeal. And so, in the corners of the world, on the tundra's edge, beneath jungle canopies, across windswept deserts, the last cavemen endured. We call them by many names now: nomads, hunter-gatherers, foragers. But in truth, they were the continuance of a lifestyle that had once been universal, the last flickers of an era that had spanned tens of thousands of years. Not the farmers building clay granaries, but the herders moving with the seasons. The families whose shelter was still temporary, still stitched from hide, still warmed by breath and bone. Among these were groups like the San of southern Africa, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, the Ainu of Japan, the Inuit of the Arctic, indigenous peoples in the Americas, who, even after agriculture swept across continents, kept walking. They weren't leftovers. They weren't frozen in time. They were resilient. And their days, they looked familiar if you've been paying attention. Wake with the sun, check the wind, scan the tracks in the soil or snow or sand, talk with others, plan the day, split the group. Some go after birds, others forage berries, some stay behind, watching children or patching shelters. Lunch is casual, opportunistic, a root unearthed, a lizard caught, a handful of berries chewed while the sun climbs high. They walk, always walk. Their day is a moving equation. What's over that ridge? Where did the gazelles go? Did the rains reach the far plain? Has the fruit come in at the old grove? They don't hoard, they don't store, they don't fence, because everything they need is in motion, so they move too. And yet, they know everything about the land. They know which plants sting and which soothe, which birds nest near snakes, which wines bring dryness and which bring thunder. They don't read maps, they remember them, across generations, across songs, across firelight. Their tools are light, bone, wood, reed, efficient, not ornamental, a spear that balances just right, a digging stick passed from mother to daughter, a net knotted by hand. But even so, there's art, painted walls in rock shelters, beads carved from ostrich shells, rhythmic clapping, stomping, humming, dance that isn't performance but prayer, stories told in fragments, passed from voice to voice, long before the written word even tried to keep up. And at night, they sit like we always have, around fire. The light flickers, the children doze, the adults tell stories, but not just about animals and spirits. They tell stories about today. Who found what? Who fell? Who laughed? What dreams were dreamed? They talk about the future too, which direction they'll go, when they'll leave, what they'll leave behind, because they don't stay long. And that, more than anything, defined the last cavemen. They left no trace, or almost none. They didn't build ziggurats, no pyramids, no temples of stone. No golden jewelry buried in layers of rock, just fire pits, faint footprints, bones cleaned clean by vultures and time. And yet, what they left within their descendants has outlasted empires, because in their movement, they preserved ideas modern civilization nearly forgot. That time is not a thing to conquer, but a thing to move with. That land cannot be owned, only known. That survival doesn't mean domination, it means balance. And above all, that a person is not defined by their possessions, but by their place in the story of the world. These last cavemen didn't fade into obscurity. Some were killed, displaced, assimilated. Others survived, quietly, fiercely, often invisibly, on the margins of the modern world. Their descendants still walk today, still hunt, still listen to the wind, still understand the forest better than any satellite ever will. And what did they do all day? They lived, not less than us, not simpler, differently, with a rhythm that, ironically, may have been closer to peace than anything we've yet managed. But of course, the world didn't pause for them. Cities rose, kings ruled, writing began, and the people who once danced in caves now filed taxes, built roads, and forgot the names of the winds. So as the caveman passed into legend, into caricature, into textbook footnote, we were left with echoes, stone tools in a museum case, paintings hidden in European caverns, footprints hardened in ash and time. And yet, we still remember. We still feel something when we walk through the woods alone, barefoot, when we sit beside a fire, watching sparks vanish into a night sky too wide for words, when we hear drums or stories or the soft hush of wind through tall grass. Something ancient stirs, because deep inside every city dweller, every commuter, every person scrolling a screen at midnight, there is still a small flicker of the fire our ancestors built. The question is, do we still know how to tend it? Let's take a breath. We've walked beside hunters and gatherers. We've crouched in caves, watched stars rise over frostbitten hills, listened to the hiss of meat over fire. We've planted the first seeds of civilization, then followed those who turned away from it, back into the wind, the forest, the open sky. But now we stand here, in our modern skin, shoes on, phone charged, fridge full, and we ask, what did cavemen actually do all day? It's tempting to reduce the answer to the basics that they hunted, they gathered, they moved, they survived. But the deeper truth is far more human and far more familiar, because behind the spears and smoke, their days were made of the same materials as ours. They worked, yes, not on spreadsheets or sales calls, but they tracked, dug, built, crafted. They mended, they carried, they taught, they ate, not from menus or takeout bags, but from fields and forests. They tasted the world one bite at a time, and every meal was hard won. They rested, maybe not on memory foam, but beside fires, under firs, heads resting on each other's shoulders, breathing in the scent of smoke, damp earth, and shared breath. They talked, long before books, before podcasts, before Instagram lives. There was the voice, telling stories, explaining dreams, joking, whispering, remembering. They sang, some melodies lost, some still hidden in folk traditions across the world. Songs to mourn, songs to warn, songs to celebrate, to soothe, to teach. They grieved. Death wasn't abstract. It was near, always near. A child who didn't wake up. A hunter who never came home. They buried their dead with care, with ritual, with meaning. They loved. We don't need fossils to prove that. It's in the way they raised children, the way they protected each other, The way they made gifts, shared food, chose to stay. They feared storms, predators, disease, spirits. Each new sound in the night was a question. Each missing person, a lesson. They believed, not in cathedrals or scripture, but in something bigger, something that made sense of the chaos, the ancestors, the sky, the breath in their chest. And yes, they played. They carved toys, made jokes, danced when no one was watching, mimicked bird calls, threw stones just to see if they could hit a tree. What did cavemen do all day? They lived, fully, deeply, consciously. They did not rush. They had no clocks. But their days were full, not with busyness, but with being. And the question we should be asking is not what they did, but what we still carry. Because let's not pretend there's a great divide between then and now. There isn't. The average person today has more in common with a Paleolithic forager than with a medieval king. We still eat in groups. We still crave stories. We still dance when the music hits right, laugh when someone trips and swears, grieve when someone we love disappears from the world. We still want the same things: warmth, safety, belonging, purpose. And those things, they haven't changed in 200,000 years. What has changed is how we chase them. Our world is louder, faster, more connected, more fragmented, more artificial, more abstract. We don't walk all day anymore. We sit, a lot. We don't hunt our food. We click a button. We don't gather together nightly. We schedule catch-ups and text from across the room. But the instincts remain. That flicker of restlessness after staring at a screen too long. That's the mammoth chaser in you. That relief after a hard workout, when your body aches and your lungs burn. That's the forager who knows effort equals survival. That joy around a campfire, when the sky darkens and the air smells like wood smoke. That's the ancient memory of home. Even our fears, of the dark, of isolation, of loud noises in still rooms, are echoes. Warnings passed down from the ones who didn't make it, who forgot to stay close, who didn't run fast enough. We are modern humans, yes, but we're also ghosts wearing neon, cavemen with credit cards, beings built for the long walk, the low fire, the shared task. And in that truth, there's power, because we can remember, we can reclaim something lost, not by throwing away technology or running into the woods forever, but by weaving old instincts into new rhythms. Walk more, with others, outside, eat with attention, with gratitude, with company, sit around fires, or under stars, or just without your phone for a bit. Tell stories, share them like seeds, touch, laugh, move, rest, listen, because those aren't luxuries, they're who we are. If you've made it this far, you've walked a long way, through frozen valleys and shadowy caves, across savannas, up mountains, through silent forests where fire was magic and time was marked by moonlight. We've seen what our ancestors did, what they needed, what they built, not in monuments, but in habits, in movement, in the shape of a shared life. So what's left to say? Just this. Cavemen were not what we think they were. They weren't slow or dumb or savage. They were patient, observant, adaptable, tender in ways we still barely understand, wise enough to survive the chaos of a planet that didn't care if they lived or died. They didn't waste. They didn't rush. They didn't divide life into minutes and hours. They divided it into tasks, into seasons, into presents. The line from them to us isn't broken. It's not even curved. It's straight, long, winding through deserts and cities, kings and wars, wires and satellites. but it's still one path. The path of human life, etched one barefoot step at a time. And that brings us to the real answer to our question, the heart of it. What did cavemen actually do all day? They noticed. They listened. They watched the way birds flew before a storm, the way deer tracks looked different after rain, the way a person's voice changed before they cried. They adapted. They didn't control the world. They moved with it. They shared food, shelter, tasks, pain, celebration. They remembered. Not just facts, but feelings, losses, triumphs. The way the sky looked before their first child was born. The sound of laughter during a long winter. They made meaning out of rocks, out of fire, out of shadows, out of the hunger to understand why the world hurt and why it sometimes healed. That's the real story, not just of cavemen, but of us. And in a world that often feels like it's moving too fast, it's worth asking, what are we doing all day? Are we noticing? Are we adapting or just reacting? Are we sharing or hoarding? Are we remembering? Are we making anything that will last, even if it's just a story passed across the fire? The answers aren't easy, but they don't have to be, because the point of looking back isn't nostalgia, it's calibration. It's remembering that long before we had machines or money, or even written language, we had each other. We had firelight. We had rhythm. We had the quiet, sacred pulse of living fully in the world. And maybe, just maybe, we can have that again. Not by becoming cavemen, but by remembering that we still are. Beneath the deadlines, beneath the tech, beneath the layers of modern life we think define us, there is still a creature who knows how to move, how to make, how to love, how to grieve, how to gather, and most of all, how to live. So the next time you feel tired of it all, the noise, the pressure, the screens, the pace, step outside, breathe the air, touch the dirt, light a candle, tell someone a story, share something, listen. You're not going backward, you're going home. Thank you for walking this far with me. If you ever find yourself under a sky full of stars, away from the noise, close your eyes and imagine 100,000 years ago, someone just like you stood in that same darkness with the same heart and looked up and wondered the same things. Some things never change, and maybe they never should. And what did they do all day? They lived, not less than us, not simpler, differently, with a rhythm that, ironically, may have been closer to peace than anything we've yet managed. But of course, the world didn't pause for them. Cities rose, kings ruled, writing began, and the people who once danced in caves now filed taxes, built roads, and forgot the names of the winds. So as the caveman passed into legend, into caricature, into textbook footnote, we were left with echoes. Stone tools in a museum case, paintings hidden in European caverns, footprints hardened in ash and time. And yet we still remember. We still feel something when we walk through the woods alone, barefoot, when we sit beside a fire, watching sparks vanish into a night sky too wide for words, when we hear drums or stories or the soft hush of wind through tall grass. Something ancient stirs, because deep inside every city dweller, every commuter, every person scrolling a screen at midnight, there is still a small flicker of the fire our ancestors built. The question is, do we still know how to tend it? Let's take a breath. We've walked beside hunters and gatherers. We've crouched in caves, watched stars rise over frostbitten hills, listened to the hiss of meat over fire. We've planted the first seeds of civilization, then followed those who turned away from it, back into the wind, the forest, the open sky. But now we stand here, in our modern skin, shoes on, phone charged, fridge full, and we ask, what did cavemen actually do all day? It's tempting to reduce the answer to the basics. They hunted, they gathered, they moved, they survived. But the deeper truth is far more human and far more familiar. Because behind the spears and smoke, their days were made of the same materials as ours. They worked, yes, not on spreadsheets or sales calls, but they tracked, dug, built, crafted. They mended, they carried, they taught, they ate, not from menus or takeout bags, but from fields and forests. They tasted the world one bite at a time, and every meal was hard won. They rested, maybe not on memory foam, but beside fires, under firs, heads resting on each other's shoulders, breathing in the scent of smoke, damp earth, and shared breath. They talked. Long before books, before podcasts, before Instagram lives, there was the voice, telling stories, explaining dreams, joking, whispering, remembering. They sang. Some melodies lost, some still hidden in folk traditions across the world. Songs to mourn, songs to warn, songs to celebrate, to soothe, to teach. They grieved. Death wasn't abstract. It was near, always near. A child who didn't wake up. A hunter who never came home. They buried their dead with care, with ritual, with meaning. They loved. We don't need fossils to prove that. It's in the way they raised children, the way they protected each other, the way they made gifts, shared food, chose to stay. They feared storms, predators, disease, spirits. Each new sound in the night was a question. Each missing person, a lesson. They believed, not in cathedrals or scripture, but in something bigger, something that made sense of the chaos, the ancestors, the sky, the breath in their chest. And yes, they played. They carved toys, made jokes, danced when no one was watching, mimicked bird calls, threw stones just to see if they could hit a tree. What did cavemen do all day? They lived, fully, deeply, consciously. They did not rush. They had no clocks, but their days were full, not with busyness, but with being. And the question we should be asking is not what they did, but what we still carry. Because let's not pretend there's a great divide between then and now. There isn't. The average person today has more in common with a Paleolithic forager than with a medieval king. We still eat in groups. We still crave stories. We still dance when the music hits right. Laugh when someone trips and swears. Grieve when someone we love disappears from the world. We still want the same things: warmth, safety, belonging, purpose. And those things, they haven't changed in 200,000 years. What has changed is how we chase them. Our world is louder, faster, more connected, more fragmented, more artificial, more abstract. We don't walk all day anymore. We sit. A lot. We don't hunt our food. We click a button. We don't gather together nightly. We schedule catch-ups and text from across the room. But the instincts remain. That flicker of restlessness after staring at a screen too long. That's the mammoth chaser in you. That relief after a hard workout, when your body aches and your lungs burn. That's the forager who knows effort equals survival. That joy around a campfire, when the sky darkens and the air smells like wood smoke. That's the ancient memory of home. Even our fears, of the dark, of isolation, of loud noises in still rooms, are echoes. Warnings passed down from the ones who didn't make it, who forgot to stay close, who didn't run fast enough. We are modern humans, yes, but we're also ghosts wearing neon, cavemen with credit cards, Beings built for the long walk, the low fire, the shared task. And in that truth, there's power. Because we can remember, we can reclaim something lost, not by throwing away technology or running into the woods forever, but by weaving old instincts into new rhythms. Walk more, with others, outside, eat with attention, with gratitude, with company, sit around fires, or under stars, or just without your phone for a bit. Tell stories, share them like seeds, touch, laugh, move, rest, listen. Because those aren't luxuries, they're who we are. If you've made it this far, you've walked a long way. Through frozen valleys and shadowy caves, across savannas, up mountains, through silent forests where fire was magic and time was marked by moonlight. We've seen what our ancestors did, what they needed, what they built, not in monuments, but in habits, in movement, in the shape of a shared life. So what's left to say? Just this. Cavemen were not what we think they were. They weren't slow or dumb or savage. They were patient, observant, adaptable, tender in ways we still barely understand, wise enough to survive the chaos of a planet that didn't care if they lived or died. They didn't waste. They didn't rush. They didn't divide life into minutes and hours. They divided it into tasks, into seasons, into presents. The line from them to us isn't broken. It's not even curved. It's straight, long, winding through deserts and cities, kings and wars, wires and satellites. But it's still one path. The path of human life etched one barefoot step at a time. And that brings us to the real answer to our question, the heart of it. What did cavemen actually do all day? They noticed. They listened. They watched the way birds flew before a storm, the way deer tracks looked different after rain, the way a person's voice changed before they cried. They adapted. They didn't control the world. They moved with it. They shared food, shelter, tasks, pain, celebration. They remembered. Not just facts, but feelings, losses, triumphs. The way the sky looked before their first child was born. The sound of laughter during a long winter. They made meaning. Out of rocks, out of fire, out of shadows, out of the hunger to understand why the world hurt and why it sometimes healed. That's the real story, not just of cavemen, but of us. And in a world that often feels like it's moving too fast, it's worth asking, what are we doing all day? Are we noticing? Are we adapting or just reacting? Are we sharing or hoarding? Are we remembering? Are we making anything that will last, even if it's just a story passed across the fire? The answers aren't easy, but they don't have to be. Because the point of looking back isn't nostalgia. It's calibration. It's remembering that long before we had machines or money, or even written language, we had each other. We had firelight. We had rhythm. We had the quiet, sacred pulse of living fully in the world. And maybe, just maybe, we can have that again. Not by becoming cavemen, but by remembering that we still are. Beneath the deadlines, beneath the tech, beneath the layers of modern life we think define us, there is still a creature who knows how to move, how to make, how to love, how to grieve, how to gather, and most of all, how to live. So the next time you feel tired of it all, the noise, the pressure, the screens, the pace, step outside, breathe the air, touch the dirt, light a candle, tell someone a story, share something, listen. You're not going backward, you're going home. Thank you for walking this far with me. If you ever find yourself under a sky full of stars, away from the noise, close your eyes and imagine 100,000 years ago, someone just like you stood in that same darkness with the same heart and looked up. and wondered the same things. Some things never change, and maybe they never should.